Hey everybody, Drew Renolette here, Director of Student Ministries at Cobb Prairie Community Church in Lenexa, Kansas. I hope you've all had a wonderful week. The weather has been beautiful outside, been nice warm days, some beautiful thunderstorms at night. It's been really awesome to see, and I love it. So as you know, last week I talked about a story about embracing change, how when we embrace what's around us, it really can improve our life and push us forward. We talked about David and how he had to embrace so much change in his life as he went through things and how he was able to make it through that and all of that stuff. Well, this week we're starting a series. It's called Origin Story. It's a series on just where you came from, who you are, what you're doing. It's an awesome story. And this week, the series we're going to talk about how heroes embrace who God made them to be. Now, take a minute. I want you to think about who your favorite superhero is. For me, I'd have to say it's Captain America. I think he's pretty cool. He really is an ordinary guy that's just souped up to be a superhuman. I think that's pretty awesome. He does what he can with what he has. If you've watched any of the Marvel movies, you see he's pretty cool and pretty amazing. He fights a lot of people with just a shield. I gotta say, that's awesome. But here's the thing. When we think about Captain America, we gotta think about what his weakness is, too. We think about how he's really just a human. I mean, yeah, superhuman, but juiced up. He's still vulnerable. His body can still be hurt, just like any of ours. But he's still a superhero. Now, another thing to think about. Take a minute and think back. Think back to when you were a little kid. Think about your childhood dream, what you wanted to be, what you wanted to do. For me, I definitely wanted to be a superhero. I loved Spider-Man growing up, and I honestly always was like, yeah, I am Spider-Man. I tried to play and pretend to be him. Obviously never was, but my imagination was wild, and I knew when I grew up that I was going to be Spider-Man. Well, sad to say, it didn't work out. I'm not Spider-Man, but that's okay, because I'm where I'm supposed to be. Now, think back at those dreams, and you think, wow, that was kind of silly that I thought that when I was a kid. Obviously, I think about it, and I'm like, wow, thinking about being Spider-Man, that was silly. He's not even real. Superheroes aren't real. Wait a second. Yeah, they are. Let's think about this in a different way, though. Now, when we think about superheroes, we think about superpowers. But today, we're going to look at superheroes in a different way. We're going to look about how they are ordinary people who came in and embraced who they are. They took who they were meant to be and made it to be more. And how they did that is by really diving in to who God made them to be. Now, as we know, every superhero has an origin story. Spider-Man bit by a spider. Captain America was made a super soldier by a serum, and so on. Your favorite superhero has theirs too. Now, as I said, ordinary people can be humans too. Ordinary people can be heroes too. Obviously, we're humans. But that's our superpower right there. We're humans. Let's take a minute and think about this. Let's look back at Genesis. When God created the earth, he went and created everything else. Humans were the last thing he created. Here's a few cool things about that. One, God created us in his image. He made us to be special. He made us to be more because he wanted us to be. He created everything else, but when he created us, he was finished, and it was done, and it was good. He made us to rule over the land, the creatures, the animals. That's who God made us to be. And he made us to resemble him, our creator. He made us creative, powerful, good, and just like him. That's how God created us to be. Now let's sit there and take a minute. Think about you. I want to think about me. I think about myself, and I think about how all of those things I just said, creative, good, powerful, just. When I look at my life, a lot of times those aren't things I think about myself. I don't take a lot of time and embrace who I am. I don't embrace who God made to be. Or I should say, I didn't. I didn't for a while. I was embracing other things, trying to seek ways to be better, trying to find a way to, help out without doing what God had set in front of me. I wasn't embracing what the gifts God had given me. And a lot of the times, I wasn't looking at the good in me. I looked at what was bad and tried to improve all of that instead of using what I had. Now, a lot of times, we don't focus on how we're made in the image of God. We actually focus on how things in our life don't add up. The things that aren't right, the things that aren't wrong. But finally, I came to a point in my life where I decided to embrace myself. I came to the point where I realized I was more than those flaws that I had. I was more than the way I looked. I was more than the hobbies and the things I enjoyed. Because God had put me right where he needed to be. And by embracing what I had been given, he showed me a path where I could do so much more than I could have ever thought. Now, let's look at our Bible. Let's look at what it has to say. So we're going to look at Paul. We're going to look at some of the things Paul has to say. We're going to look at Colossians a little bit. Now, Paul, he talks about the image of God. He talks about how we're made in God's image, but how Jesus is that image. Now, that's a little confusing. I think the best way for me to explain it is when it comes to being made in the image, it's like a painting where you can paint it and it gets really, really close and it looks really, really good still, but it's not quite exact. But we're made in that image. We're made to look exactly like God. We're made to be like God, but we're not perfect. On the other hand, then there's Jesus. I would say he's more like a photograph where you take a picture and it's like looking at the exact same thing, almost like a mirror where you look right back at what you're looking at. That's what it means. That's what Paul means when he says that we are made in the image and Jesus is the image. Now, the better way to say that is we're imperfect and Jesus was perfect, which I think is a cool thing to know. That Jesus is the image and we're made to look like that. Think about all the cool things Jesus did. We're made to do the same things. I think that's pretty awesome. Now, another thing that Paul says in Colossians about image and being like God and choosing Jesus is that when we choose Jesus, when we choose to follow him, when we choose to be with him, supernatural things happen. Now, again, let's look back at those superheroes we were talking about. We said they weren't real. I said that they were. Now, here's an example of that. Because supernatural things can happen. Things that we think only superheroes can do. The first off is our identities are transformed. When we choose Jesus, we go from looking at it as a human perspective, like what we want to see, what we want to do, to going and looking at it completely different. Looking at it as a way of Jesus would look at life. I said we were imperfect and Jesus was perfect. Our mindset changes to that. Another thing is we move from life to death, from old to new. We get a new opportunity. We get to live again because we are rejuvenated with Christ. And lastly, we are made to reflect more fully the image of God. We go from that less perfect painting to an even better painting. There's no way we ever get to that photograph where it's perfect, where it's exactly what it looks like, because we're human and we can't be perfect. But we start to look more like God when we choose Jesus. We start to fully embrace this. And the fact is, every superhero, most superheroes, not everyone, I shouldn't say that, started as human, and then they were transformed. Just like us, when we choose Jesus, We have the opportunity to be transformed. Because when we embrace who we are, we can be a hero. God sets a path in front of us that he decides he wants us to choose. God gives us an option and an opportunity to be a hero when we choose him. So to be a hero, embrace who you are, and walk the path as God has set in front of you. I hope you all have a wonderful week. God bless.